Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much. My name's Alice Baxter. I'm a presenter with the BBC. And we're all here because we want to hear from Boris Becker, 3 times Wimbledon winner, the youngest ever winner of Wimbledon. He first won it when he was 17 years old. And we're celebrating the fact that he's written a book about his Wimbledon experience, coming out very shortly and available on iBooks. So let's welcome Boris Becker to the stage.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
Hi, Boris. Hello.
Thank you.
Good to see you. So as I was saying, we're here to celebrate your book that you have come out, celebrating 30 years since you first won Wimbledon.
Yeah.
You were 17 at the time. What was it like being 17 and winning Wimbledon?
Well, it was as big of a surprise to me as it was for everybody else, believe me. The beautiful thing about youth is that you're not always aware of what you're doing. You just live in the moment, you're thinking about now. So when I started the whole grass court campaign 30 years ago, the first tournament I played and actually won was in the Queen's Club. I was also the youngest and unseeded and everything. So once I got to the final there and won it, the losing finalist Johan Kriek had this famous quote of, if this guy from West Germany is going to play anywhere close to what he's played today, he's going to win Wimbledon next week. So obviously the whole media room laughed at him, and then nobody was taking his wise words or his bets. And I didn't really notice anything about it anyway, because I was just in the zone. But when I got to Wimbledon the week after, my main goal was, obviously I was unseeded, that I'd like to play on centre court. That was my main ambition. I was a little boy growing up in West Germany, and my hero in those days was Bjorn Borg. The reason was, he kept winning on centre court at Wimbledon. And I said, one of these days when I'm big and I'm strong, I want to play on Wimbledon centre court, just like Bjorn Borg. So when the draw was made and I played in the first round the American Hank Pfister, scheduled 3rd on centre court. Those were the days where Wimbledon centre court didn't have a roof. So because of the bad weather and the rain, then eventually the Monday night match was called after a set and a half. I was losing to finish onto the next day on the Tuesday afternoon. So I already thought, well, I will play twice on centre court within 24 hours. So one of my main ambitions was done. But obviously then I was going through the rounds. And then I wasn't really thinking about the final or winning. I was literally living in the moment, thinking about the very next match.
So you literally had nothing to lose going into it, really. And watching videos of you playing that match, that tournament, just to remind myself, you really did have a very aggressive style of play. You came to the net an awful lot. You really seemed to go at it.
Yeah, that was my style of play. I was one of the first power players with a big serve, and I think some of my opponents still played with rackets out of wood. I mean, you can't imagine it anymore today, but not everybody played with a graphite racket in those days. Some players play with a wooden racket. But obviously, with my style and the power I had on the serve and the ground strokes, it was very much suited for grass. Obviously, because of that, I started winning more and more matches. And another thing we shouldn't forget, we're talking 1985, right? So the source of information didn't exist. We had no internet. There was no social media. There was no other source of information warning me about what I'm going to do tomorrow or the next week or the implications it might have on my life. So I was literally living in a bubble, reading with very bad English that I had then. Not that I have a great English now, but I had terrible English then.
That's pretty good.
Trying to read the Telegraph or the Times, which I didn't really understand at 17. So I was living in that bubble, going to practice court every day, playing my match every other day until I really woke up pretty much in the middle of the second week, because then the press conference were bigger. German media was flying over to England, and all of a sudden, out of this West German young tennis player became this sensation of maybe being the youngest.
And it's so interesting you talk about that, the fact that you were in a bubble, which players these days can't be. Here we are sitting in the Apple store on Regent Street. And it makes me wonder how different it must be to be a 17-year-old player now to how it was for you back then. Like, do you think the pressures in terms of constantly being aware of reaction to every move you make on Twitter, on social media, etc. Are the pressures greater or just different?
I think the pressures are different. You're aware of them now because of the very public world we're living now. I mean, every teenager has an iPhone, I hope, and is connected to his social media world. Therefore, you constantly share messages and information, and therefore, whatever you do, it becomes a bigger deal. Now, if you do something great in sport, and you're 17, 18, obviously the whole world press will take notice of you. Therefore, after every practice or match, you're going to open your phone and you're going to realize, wow, what I've just done created world headline news. Therefore, the expectations become bigger. Therefore, the pressures become bigger. And I think that's the main reason why you don't see successful teenagers winning these days, is because of that. They just can't handle the pressure, and they're not mature enough to keep a cool head once they reach a quarter semi-final.
And also, we have the issue that players these days, they're mic'd up, aren't they? So we can hear everything they say.
Well, when I grew up, my tennis teachers were the likes of Elina Stase. I played with John McEnroe. Yeah. I played a lot with Jimmy Connors, and as again, my English wasn't that great yet, but they learned me a whole new vocabulary of English that I've never heard in school or from my parents. So I quickly matured language-wise. So whenever they kept talking to me on the court, I kept barking back at them. Now imagine nowadays, Djokovic telling something to Federer and Federer telling something to Nadal, and they respond to one another. That's impossible. First of all, they get fined. The umpires will give them warning.
Therefore, and the fines are huge,
the fines are huge.
Like
so they
tens of thousands of dollars.
They can't do that. People sometimes complain that it's not enough emotions in the game today, and you don't see the characters. Well, we have the characters. They just have to be careful not to let it loose, because otherwise, they can't play the next day because they're fined. Yeah. In the 80s, it didn't exist. I mean, the amount of fines McEnroe and Nastase got, they had to win the tournament just to break even for the week, just to be able to pay the fine. So that was my school, my beginning of becoming a professional.
You mentioned
talking about living in a moment.
You mentioned John McEnroe and others growing up, splashing onto the scene as you did at age 17. Who were your main rivals?
When I first got on the scene and winning Wimbledon at 17, the #1 player in the world, it was McEnroe at the beginning of the year, but then Lendl took over. Mm-hmm. So when I played Lendl in the 86 final, he was the #1 player in the world, and he was that for a while. So I quickly became #2, and obviously you want to challenge the #1, and Ivan was the #1. In the late 80s, early 90s, my toughest rival was Stefan Edberg. I played 3 consecutive Wimbledon finals against him, and we were changing 1 and 2 over 4 years. The mid-90s, the Americans came back with Sampras and Agassi, and my main rival on grass court was Pete Sampras. And up until he came around, I felt that I owned Wimbledon Centre Court. It was my home and my house. So when he started beating me in one of the Wimbledon finals, I told him at the net that, I used to own this place. I'm going to give you the keys now. You have a new ownership of Wimbledon Centre Court, and it was mic'd up. It was 1997, and when I got to the press conference afterwards, everybody knew already what I told him at the net, so it wasn't a surprise anymore. But that's how I felt. And so
passing on the mantle.
Passing on the mantle. Those 3 or 4 players I mentioned were my toughest rival over my 15-year career.
But your career, it's evolved, hasn't it? It didn't end when you laid down the racket, if you like, because you have subsequently moved on to, 12 years of commentating with the BBC? How did you find that transition?
Well, the question is always where do you go as an athlete? You're called old when you're 30 years old. In most other professions, you're still starting out. You're just making your first money. In sports, when you're 31, 32, you're over the hill. So psychologically, that's a problem. You have to redefine yourself. What you write on the landing card when you enter England or America. You know, what's your profession? You don't want to write, I was an ex-tennis player. So it takes a little bit, and I felt comfortable with the media. I mean, I was always on the other side of the red light. So I said, well, why don't I start, you know, doing something that I think I know, which is tennis. Why don't I start, you know, talking about it, commentating about it? And the BBC trusted me, and then I started in 2002, and I did 12 years, you know, in the row, a Wimbledon final. And that for a German, believe me, is not usual. You know, we were not the most popular of nations in this country, but I happened to fall in love with the place a long time ago. So they gave me the trust, and I you know, was humbled by it, and I felt I had a good insight, because just a few years ago I was playing myself on that center court. So I changed the practice courts and the tennis courts to the booth with John McEnroe. I mean, for me, he's the best tennis commentator in the world. And I shared many moments with him, and you can tell that I like to talk sometimes. Well, he talks a lot more than me. So the battle is always not so much what we talk about a match, is that who gets the mic first. And then not necessarily we talk about the backhand and the forehand of the guy we're talking about. It's about his backhand or my backhand, who is going to be better.
So the rivalry continues,
the
but
rivalry
this time
continues.
over the mic.
Exactly.
Yeah, I wanted to ask what it's like to be locked in a tiny box with, you know, the main rival of your, for a large chunk of your career for hours on end.
Well,
sounds like it's quite fun.
It's quite fun, and mostly because we truly respect one another. When we played one another, we were fierce rivals, and there would be 2 people going in the booth, and one was going to go out. We have matured. He became a family man. I'm a family man. So we became actually close friends now. And the challenge is always who's going to tell you more about his great stories from back in the day. It got to the point where the BBC says, listen, the 2 of you in the one booth, we don't hear about the current match. So either one has to go or the other has to go. But we take it with a, you know, with a smile, and we move on.
And of course, the other arm to your this new chapter in your life, post actually playing the tennis, has been to be a coach, and a coach to none other than Novak Djokovic. I mean, how did that come about?
Well, I was asked a few times already to become a coach of good players. When you've played on the tour for such a long time, the last thing is you want to go back on the tour as a coach. So I felt commentary and media work as such, you know, being based in one city was easier, was better for my family and me. But what do you do when Novak Djokovic is calling you? You're going to tell him no. You don't want to coach him. So when he called about, you know, 18 months ago now, 20 months ago, I had a serious sit down with my wife and with my family, explaining, listen, this is one of a kind guy. This is a real opportunity for me. And she said, listen, we will support that is something you should do. But that means I'm going to be 4 weeks in Australia and 3 weeks now in Paris, and then obviously a month in London, which is easy because we live here, but then another month in America, because you can't coach online, right? You can't coach from back home. You have to be on the practice court. You have to be in the players' lounge. And we all agreed that this is what we're going to do. And then I had a nice sit down with him, wanting to know how much his fire burns, because when I put all my eggs in a way, I want to go to Australia to win. I'm not happy with the semi-final or final. And I realized that he was really burning. He wanted to win a lot more than he has, which is not small feat, because he was already #1 and won a couple of Grand Slams beforehand. So we've bonded very quickly, and we found a new relationship. And you know, now a year and a half later, he's back on the winning track. He's back to #1. He's the current Wimbledon champion. Unfortunately, he lost the French Open last Sunday. I'm sure you guys saw that a little bit. But credit to Stan Wawrinka. He did beat Nadal in the quarterfinal and Murray in the semi-final. And I think that Saturday Murray match cost him the final. It was a bit too much, even for Novak. But you know, he took it with I think everybody's seen the ceremony. He took it as a real sportsman. He gave credit to his opponent. I think he won probably more fans with his behavior afterwards than if he'd win another Grand Slam, even though it would have been the French Open. That's the class act he is. Having said that, we lost and we don't like to lose. That's the bottom line.
Novak, he's written the foreword to your book. He's talked about the importance of the kind of eye contact that you give him from the sidelines. What do you think that you give him as a coach? Why specifically do you think he wanted you rather than another former player? Is it just to do with the psychology of knowing what it's like to be under that kind of pressure, or is there something particular in the style of Boris Becker that he was after?
What I think most importantly, I faced similar situations than he has.
Yeah.
Winning a Wimbledon final or losing a Wimbledon final. Being in this high pressure type of situations where you don't learn by the books, you don't learn about talking to somebody, you have to live and breathe them, otherwise you don't know what it's like. I think that was the main reason. I'm 20 years older than him. I'd like to think that I've matured. I'd like to think that I've weathered a few storms in my life on and off the court, and I can talk to him as an older brother that has done exactly what he's done at the same age. He became a proud father last fall. At the same age I became father for the first time. There are a lot of similarities. I struggled in my mid-20s with a bit of motivation, a bit of this, a bit of that. And then he went through the same spirit. And I think that's the trust and the understanding and the respect for one another is we're a lot alike, even though we don't look alike. He's a daredevil on the court. He's a real street fighter. Really, does everything he can to win, yet within the bounds of reason and rules and regulations. In the mid-'80s, I was allowed to step over the line a couple of times. Nowadays, they can't. So there's a real understanding of one another. And yes, I was known to read players, to have a whole new aspect of winning matches that was called the mental game, where I felt I was very confident and comfortable, and usually the longer the matches wore on, the better I got. And that's something I talk to Novak a lot about, how to take on a challenge, how to take on a fight. What is it about? Is it about the first point, the first set, or is it about the last point? And how matches vary. Is three or five matches are long, 2, 3, 4 hours. So when do you pace yourself? When do you be more emotional? And at the end of the day, it's the ultimate challenge, one against one. Yeah. The only other sport that's like that, it's boxing. And you know how these guys are. So I think those are the reasons, just to give you a few ideas, why I felt that he called me.
Oh, talking of the one-on-one, and we talked about rivalries of your era, a lot of talk about the rivalry between Novak Djokovic and Roger Federer, both great players. Do you have any insights into that?
Well, this is always the ultimate challenge, one against two. I mean, more broadly, we talk about the big four in tennis. That's Novak, Roger, that's Andy, and that's Rafa. And these four players have won more in the last 10 years than anybody else. So the moment, or the last year or so, it was Novak 1 and Roger 2. And naturally, the rivalry, the competition is there. 2 wants to have what 1 has, or vice versa. Yeah. So, and I'm surprised how well they all get along, considering how much is at stake. They're real professionals. They're role models. They understand that not only fans watch the finals, but also a lot of families and kids. So they usually watch what they say when they swear.
When they're mic'd up.
But there's a real rivalry. There's real professionalism about it. But of course, they're not going to dinner the night before the final. Of course, they avoid each other in practice. It's normal. So I'm surprised. I get to ask that question sometimes because, would you think the captain of Man United would go to dinner with the captain of Chelsea the night before they play the final? Of course not. Would you think that in the World Cup last year, that Messi would have a chat with Schweinsteiger the night before the final? Of course not. They're rivals. But everything is done within the rules, with a real sporting manner, and that's the main thing.
You mentioned there the big four players that we've got used to talking about over the past years, but of course, I don't know whether you would include Wawrinka and Dimitrov into that four. Of course, we had the upset at the French Open that you mentioned there. Looking ahead to Wimbledon, because of course your book is about your love affair with Wimbledon, what do you see? And also, are there any other players totally, in the top 100 out there that you've got your eye on as well?
Well, of course, tennis is always the number one rule. The next match counts. Doesn't matter who you play. Of course, you have your favorites, and Novak will be top seeded. Roger will be second. Of course, the plan is that these two guys meet in the final, but there are 7 matches to play, and every match you play could be your last one. It would be a huge mistake to overlook any of the other opponents. And you said it, Andy Murray is a big favorite in my eyes. He's from here. He's got the home crowd support. He won the tournament 2 years ago, and he's on a real comeback trail. I believe he's playing better now than before his back surgery. He's in fine form, and he lost a close match to Novak in Paris in 5 sets. They met in the Australian Open final. It was a close match, so the difference isn't that much. And Andy's a natural grass court player anyway. And then you would say Rafael Nadal, but he's been on a bit of a lump, you can say. He was injured a while, and he hasn't found his form yet. Having said that, he's a 2-time Wimbledon champion. I would never write Rafael Nadal off ever, as long as he picks up a tennis racket. But there are other players that are naturally suited for grass. Dimitrov is one. He was a semi-final last year. Milos Raonic, in my eyes, from Canada, is a very good player on grass. Tomas Berdych from the Czech Republic has a great year already. So there are a number of players that on any given day, and that's the problem with grass, somebody with big serve and heavy ground strokes can hit you off the court. So at all stages, you have to be aware of who you're playing against. And then there's this resurgence of teenagers. There was a time when he said teenagers don't have a chance anymore. Well, that has changed with 2 young Australians, Nick Kyrgios, Kokinakis. They're both, very promising up-and-coming players. Kyrgios, in fact, beat Nadal last year in Wimbledon, just to give you an idea how good he is. Then you have a guy from Croatia who's 18. It's called Borna Koric. He's very good. And a young player from Germany who's 18 as well. Zverev is his name, Alexander Zverev. So you have teenagers coming back into the scene. And again, you don't know how good they're going to be in 5 years. So I know they're very talented, and their breakthrough could happen any tournament. That's one. What established players have to be careful. Watch the young ones. See how they practice. Tennis changes every other month. You have your weaknesses and strengths. You always have to be on top of your game, and you have to find the motivation, inspiration every single time you go out, because it's an individual sport. In football, your leg can hurt, and you signal to your coach, take me out. The rest of the team will take over. In tennis, you have to play the first and the last point.
Yeah. As I say, this book is about really a love affair with Wimbledon.
It is.
You won it 3 times, and maybe a bit of a love affair with the UK. I think we kind of like to think of you as a bit of an honorary Brit, but of course you are actually German, and you're a bit of a national treasure over there as well. But as I understand, you're now living full-time in Wimbledon. You have been for the past a couple of years. Why have you decided to move here, and how's that gone down in Germany?
Well, this is really the story about the book. It's been 30 years since I first started winning on Centre Court, and I call it my home now. It's the place I've been most in my life. This fortnight, it's been going on for a long time. You mentioned my tennis live, then I did the commentary, then I did the coaching. It was always surrounded by Wimbledon in one way or another. And it's a beautiful part of the world. Whoever wants to come out there, it's a real country feel. Half an hour away from one of the most bubbling and most important cities in the world. That's really the charm of it. It's country living next to a real cosmopolitan city. I like the commons, I like the greens, I like the peacefulness of it. Of course, I like the fact that there's a club a few miles away from my house that was very important into my life. I made Wimbledon a place that was called the 7th of July 1980 for my 2nd birthday. I was this unknown West German until the 6th of July, and overnight it became this sensation, a Wunderkind they called me. It meant so much to me on a professional level and on a personal level that I call it home today.
And of course, lots of speculation in the media now about whether or not you're going to apply for British citizenship. Anything to say on that?
Let's see. Obviously, I like living in this country. Eventually, we're going to think about it. Our son is born here. We love the UK. We love living in London. So it'll be a natural progression.
You mentioned your children are growing up here. I know that, well, you talk about it in the book, that when you first started saying you wanted to be a professional sports player, your parents weren't actually that encouraging of it. They were from a professional background, or dad was an architect. You had to really convince them that this was a potentially profitable livelihood for you. If your children come to you, do you think you'll be a bit more encouraging if they say, I want to be a professional sports player?
I have 4 children. The oldest is 21, the youngest is 5. You have to put yourself back in we're talking mid-80s. Professional sports didn't really exist unless you were an American football player. European football players really, they made a bit of living, but it wasn't that profitable as it is now, let alone tennis players. So when the great managers in the days, the Mark McCormicks and the Donald Dells, came to my father's home, asking for how much money we have to pay to sign up your son, my father showed him the door and said, "My son isn't for sale." They weren't your typical tennis parents that would do anything, and I'm very, very proud of that. I could always go back, and they were my father and mother, not my manager or coach. So it was quite difficult to convince, especially my mother, to take a leave of absence for 2 years. And she said, "Listen, you better talk to the school principal to tell him about, because I don't think he is going to let you go." So I was 16, little Boris goes there to the school principal, obviously with my parents, explaining him that I want to have a leave of absence for 2 years. And he rightly said, "Well, if something may happen to you, you can always come back, but please come back within the next year so we can discuss that thing again." Well, within the year I won Wimbledon. So I came back, Wimbledon champion. I had hundreds of people in front of the school wanting my autograph. Yet 17-year-old Boris went to the school principal, had this interview, and he kept on convincing me that I should come back to school in case something happens. And I said, "Mr. School Principal, I've just won a little tournament in UK. It's okay. I can hit the tennis ball, and I made a little bit of money too." "Yeah, but in case something with your knee and everything." So again, the mindset was professional sports in the mid-80s really didn't exist. Yeah. And I was probably one of the first ones that started making money out of it.
Fortunately, I think it all ended up okay, really.
It was okay, yes.
It was okay in the
yes.
end. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. I don't want to hog Boris. Does anyone from the audience have a question? A gentleman in the front row. Actually, I think we've got some microphones coming around. There we go.
Hello, Boris. Hello, Alison. I've written it in my memo. I'm a great fan of yours. I remember the matches in Wimbledon very much. Your first win against Kevin Curran. Why do you think serve and volley has gone out of vogue? Players like you and McEnroe have become very rare. My follow-on question after the Sampras and Federer effect, do you see a future serve and volleyer stepping onto the courts ever again? Thank you.
My pleasure. No, I think you raise a very good point. There was a long time where the baseline players, I call them the counter punchers, started winning tournaments. I mean, it's partly Novak's fault, it's partly Andy's fault, it's partly Rafael's fault, because they've been winning, all these matches from the back of the court. But there's a guy from Switzerland called Roger Federer who actually plays very, very well the serve and volley, and more now than he's played before, because he's realizing that's maybe something these baseliners don't like so much. And he's perfected his craft. He's a 7-time Wimbledon champion. He's, one of the all-time greats, certainly the most successful. So there is a chance, if you know what you're doing, to be still successful with a serve and volley game. Having said that as well, the young Australians, they play offensive tennis. No, they don't come to the net every time, but they play offensive tennis. They come after the first serve. They're looking to win the point, hitting a winner instead of waiting for the opponent to make a mistake. I think that's the biggest change. And it really matters how good you are. I think it is possible today, but these bailers have pretty good returns, so you better make sure your approach shot is good.
Have you got another question for Boris? Lady there in the denim jacket. I think there's a mic coming your way.
Hi.
Hello.
I want to ask, which of the following do you prefer more? Being a coach of a top player or being a top player yourself? or can you not compare them?
I'm 47 now, so a quick response to that, I'm much better coach than I'm a player. But when you're 27, you want to be the player. I don't think I would have been a good coach 10 years ago, because my mindset was still the player. I would have coached my player the way I would have played, but that's wrong. A coach has to think what's best for the player. And mentality-wise, you're in the second row. It's about the player, it's not about you. And I think that has a lot to do with growing up, maturing, and understanding what you need to do to make your player a much better player. Because of my playing history, the understanding is there, the emotions are there, and I think the small details of winning and losing is there, but I'd rather coach these days than play.
Interesting question. Gentleman there in the back row. I think we've got... Oh,
Yeah.
hello. Sorry, excuse me. Yeah, sorry about that. I think the mic's just coming.
The mic is coming, hold on, otherwise we don't hear it.
Mr. Becker,
Yes.
it's great to meet you.
Thank you.
I love London, but I think you should consider also becoming a Grenadian citizen. But I wanted to ask you, do you think that if the sets were shortened to 3 for the men, would their professional life be longer? Because I'm sure at a certain age when you physically can't do as much as you can, your passion is still there.
Of course, the passion is still there now, but we have rules in tennis, and I think they're very good. A set lasts until 6, or you play tiebreaker until 7. I think that's good. There's always talk of changing some of the rules in tennis. I'm not so much for it, because there's a reason this game is so successful for such a long time. Yes, the invention of a tiebreak was good. Just to shorten the sets altogether, talking the 60s and 70s, they played sets 12-10, 8-6, so the match would last even longer. With the television world we live in, that wouldn't be feasible. But the 5th set is still open, and not too long ago, there was the longest match of all time, played at Wimbledon. John Isner won that. Let me think the score, was it 60-58 or 70-68, something like that, ridiculous, 12 hours. So you got to be fit enough to play the game, period. Whether you're 25 or 35, it doesn't matter. You have to be good enough, you have to be fit enough. And if you can't do it anymore, you got to move on. Those are the rules. Yeah.
Oh, exhausting.
And I agree with the island you live in. It's a beautiful part of the world, yes. So, yeah.
Lady there in the front row. To wait for the mic.
Hi. I think a lot of people were quite surprised to see Andy Murray hiring Amelie Mauresmo as his coach, because you don't see many women on the tour coaching the men's game especially. Do you see this as something that's going to take off, and do you think you're going to see a lot more female coaches for the men's game in the coming years?
I must admit I was surprised as well. I liked the relationship he had with Ivan Lendl. I liked the relationship he had with Danny Valverdue. And I didn't know that there was a relationship between Amelie and him and so forth. But at the end of the day, you're either a good or bad coach. Doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman. She's certainly a very fine coach. They've had great success the last 12 months. And that's really his choice. Whatever works for him is the right decision. I haven't seen many more female coaches on the men's tour though. I guess it's still an unknown territory, and male players are still careful with it. I understand on one hand. On the other hand, you have to do what's best for your game. And if the coach you're talking to is a woman, go hire her. It doesn't really matter. And I give Andy credit for that. It was a bold move. It was a decision that was criticized. People laughed about it. I don't think all the opponents that lost to him in the last 12 months laugh about it anymore.
Okay. Another question? I think we maybe go to this guy. Quite right.
Hi, Boris. Firstly, huge fan. I was fortunate enough to, the first tennis match I ever went to was the Wimbledon final in '97.
Oh, excellent,
So
yeah.
I Obviously,
Great.
wrong result, but I remember,
Yeah.
you know. I was reading through the iBook this morning when I
Yeah.
booked it, and I'd like to think I know a little bit about you and the rest of it, but what really struck me is some of the details which I'd never read before. When you were going through it, you know, the making of the book, did you yourself sort of almost remember memories that you had previously forgotten?
Well, when you're in the middle of it, meaning middle of a tennis tournament, and then you give an interview afterwards, you're very protective of the insights and the difficult moments you go through, because you don't want your opponents to understand what you're going through, and also you don't want the world to know. And I'm not the type of guy that lives in the past. I've never watched an old video of mine. I've never watched a speech of mine. I live in the moment. I think for the future, obviously, because of my heritage. So when the decision was made that it's 30 years and maybe I should remember in a nice, friendly way, in an honest way, about what Wimbledon meant to you then and what it means to you now, you start remembering, and you take your time, and it's a process. Book takes a while, where you go through the nitty-gritty, and with a bit of distance to it, you understand that those were unbelievable times, but they're also difficult times. And I think it's my responsibility to share that, to teach other 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds what it was like. Plus also, when you are that much in the spotlight, now and then you want to have the record straight, just for memory's sake. I'm still young enough to remember what happened 30 years ago. Ask me in 10 years, I would have forgotten most of it. So, and I dedicated this book to my 4 children, because eventually they're old enough and they may have a question or two. As I said, we're not getting any younger, so this is for memory's sake. They have a father that won Wimbledon a few times and calls Wimbledon his home, and I want them to know why that is.
Glorious. I think we had a question here in the front row.
Hi, Boris.
Hello.
Honored to meet you.
Thank you.
A few people wanted me to ask you this question. What would you regard as the best match you ever played, where you thought you were like unbeatable? And also the opposite, what was the worst match you ever played, and you walked off court thinking, my God, should I quit?
I have forgotten that. The best match, very difficult to say. I've played over 1,000 matches. I've won over 750 matches of that. Each match was important, whether it was a first round, a second round, or a final. And I keep really saying that because I mean it. A Wimbledon final isn't won on that final Sunday. It's won on some practice court at 10 o'clock in the morning. It's a windy day, nobody's watching, and your knees hurt. That's when you learn the determination and the desire and the attitude, what it takes to win a Wimbledon final. So all the matches I played, I wouldn't want to miss for the world. The ones I've lost, I've forgotten. I'm a bad loser. It takes me a long time to overcome that. I've had some tough losses, of course. I didn't win, I was in 7 Wimbledon finals. I lost 4. I've never won the French Open. I could have been number 1 a lot longer, potentially. But on the other hand, I'm totally blessed, really, that I've made my passion my job. Very few people can say that, and I've got to travel all around the world. I met amazing people, and I was winning more than I was losing. So bottom line, I'm a lucky guy.
Where do you keep all of your awards, Boris? Do they have centre stage at home? Are they on the mantelpiece, or are they in the downstairs league?
No. A few are in museums, in the Tennis Hall of Fame in Rhode Island. Germany has a few. My mother has others. In my home, I hardly have any, and when I have friends and everything, they're almost disappointed that all the trophies. I thought you.
Yeah.
But I'm not the type of guy that needs to see it every day how much I've won to have a smile on my face. It was good while I did it, but today my life is a little different, and I like talking about it. You know, the book was important to me, but it's not something I have to share every day of the rest of my life.
Lovely. Do you have a final question for Boris?
This gentleman here? Oh,
I'll
we make two
gentleman over.
questions.
Oh, yeah, two.
The lady and a man, yeah?
Yeah, let's go.
Thank you. Hello, first of all. I have two questions. One requires a very short answer. May I ask both of them, or should I choose one over the other?
One or the other.
The second one requires a very short answer.
Okay, I'll give you a
thanks.
short answer.
I'll start with the longer one.
Okay.
Boris, at 17, you won Wimbledon. By the age of 24, you had won almost everything. I wanted to ask you, do you think there are dangers in very early success? And would you prefer your success had come at a later point in life?
If I would have had the same outcome, yes. You know, winning Wimbledon at 17 was great on one hand, but it put a lot of expectations and pressures on the other. Every match was considered another Wimbledon final, and I for myself, and then for my opponents and the world media. So I didn't think I would, or I didn't develop as freely and as naturally in the forthcoming years because of that, because I was always measured against. Was it luck? Was it you know, if the famous 15 minutes the guy had, or is he really that good? I probably would have won more if my first Grand Slam win would have come at 20 or 21, and I had those 2 or 3 years as a learning curve and as just trying out some of the things that I didn't allow myself anymore. And the second question?
The second is, what is the first word that comes in your mind when you think of Novak Djokovic?
Two words, class act.
Good answer. Great question. And let's cross over here to this lady that had a question, I think.
Please,
with
you
the
had one,
glasses.
yeah.
This question is going to come through the sign language interpreter.
Okay.
She's saying, oh, okay.
Well, first of all, wow, that was a real honour to hear some of your stories. So yeah, it's very unusual to have an interpreter to see what you were talking about, really. So I've got two questions, if that's okay. Firstly is about the book that you wrote. Obviously, you're not a writer, or you haven't been. Did you write it really quickly? Did you find it really difficult? Did you have a ghostwriter that came and helped you? How did you actually achieve the book?
I like to think I have a few talents. Writing books is not one of them. I'm very honest about that. I had a wonderful ghostwriter. He became a close friend of mine. We shared many afternoons and many nights because I have to open my soul to him. He really needs to understand why I want to say whatever I said. I think he did a very good job. His advantage was that he's fluent in English and in German. I'm not 100% perfect in English, so sometimes I had to ask him in German what that word meant in English, and he was able to translate it to me, and that really helped in the whole process. He's a real tennis connoisseur. He travels to tour for a long time. He was a journalist while I played. So we go back a long time. So he's seen my journey in the last 20 years, 25 years. So I didn't have to explain to him the impact Wimbledon had on me.
I read recently that you were quite disappointed about the new rule about not being able to swear on court. I was wondering, is there any transcript? Because back in my time, there wasn't any subtitles, so I never got to see you swearing on court. How can I find a transcript?
Just watch one of these old matches between McEnroe and Connors. I would suggest to turn off the volume a little bit because it's different type of English. No, what I meant was, nowadays players get criticized that they're not personalities because they don't show emotions. And I want to defend the players who are saying they are great personalities, but the rules don't allow them to show their true feelings because they get fined, they get penalty points, they get warnings. On the other hand, tennis is becoming a family sport. You have lots of kids, young families watch it. And I think it's right that they cannot just do whatever they want to do, because they might do that. So, but again, it's not the players' fault, it's the world we live in. And everything has to be very politically correct. They make a lot of money, they are role models, and they have to behave a certain way. But that doesn't mean they're not personalities. I think they're great personalities.
Yeah, that's a great point on which to end. So thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you for your questions. Really interesting. And thank you, Boris. Such a wonderful session, and best of luck with the book. Wonderful
Thank you very
to meet
much. Thank you. Thanks for listening. Thank you.